Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, Vince Coglianese.
Good afternoon to you. It's 4:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up here on this program, Mike McCormick joins us this hour. He used to write down every word that came out of Joe Biden's mouth, and for that, he deserves a Medal of Freedom. He'll talk to us about his new book. That's this hour. And then at 5:30, Andy Biggs, the congressman, will talk to us about how the government spends your money. That's ahead at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I was telling you a moment ago, this idea that Joe Biden's brain is broken was not a recent discovery. It wasn't something that we just happened upon, recently. It was during the 2020 presidential debates, during the primary debate, one of the candidates on that stage among the Democrats, Julian Castro, had this to say about Joe.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Be in for it.
Are you forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago? I mean, I can't believe that you said 2 minutes ago that they had to buy in, and now you're saying they don't have to buy. You're forgetting that.
I mean, do you hear the crowd? I mean, think back to that time frame. Why does the crowd react that way? Why does the crowd react that way specifically? When Julian Castro goes, "Are you forgetting what you just said 2 minutes ago?" And the whole crowd reacts like it's a WWE match and Joe Biden just got thrown through a table. Oh, it's because everyone and their mother was talking about Joe Biden isn't with it. Way back then, the shock was that any Democrat went there. That's why they're reacting that way. And then right after the debate, you had people like Cory Booker going on television going, Julian's got a point. Joe's not exactly the same guy he used to be. It's worth noting as we run against him to become the nominee. And now Jake Tapper is out with a book that he's co-authored recently, but it is coming out in May. Today we found out about it, where he's going to go through all the ways Joe Biden's brain is broken and how it was covered up. What do you mean? You were in on it. You covered it. What do you mean? I see Molly Hemingway pointing out today, the great Molly Hemingway. She said, this is like O.J. Simpson's book, If I Did It, which is crazy. Yeah, if I did it. He figured out a way to profit off of murdering his wife. Isn't that crazy? He's like, I can sell a book about it and then just say, if I did it, and then I'll explain the whole thing. That's pothead psychology if I've ever heard of any. So there you go. That's what's happening. Mike is calling in from Gainesville on this subject on line 3. Hey, Mike, you are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, Vince, happy birthday delayed.
Thank you for that. You sound enthusiastic about that.
I couldn't call him on the actual day.
That's all right.
Is Jake Tapper trying to tell us that he believes that Joe Biden was stuttering or stammering when he was talking to Corn Pop at the pool about the Jerry Curl Soul Glow? Couldn't get in the water?
Yeah, and the hairy legs and the fact that all the kids at the pool liked his hairy legs and they're enamored with them. Yeah, no, that's right. That a stutter is what we are to believe explains that entire mushroom trip of a speech from Joe Biden.
So do you think they're going to now admit that they were told that was a talking point anytime somebody brought up his cognitive decline? They were supposed to talk about this, a stutter that he had in his youth?
Actually, what's interesting about that? Sometimes it is a talking point that's straight up distributed, as you know, Mike. The White House will send out and everybody just dutifully repeats on the left. Sometimes it's just a conspiracy of instinct. Some of these guys, they just kind of know that, well, the last thing we should do is acknowledge that the president probably should not be president of the United States. So we'll just go with the stutter thing. That sounds good. And then they repeat it. Then they just repeat it. And then they wag their finger at anybody who says otherwise.
Yeah, they break out the shame card. You're supposed to have some sort of reservations about questioning someone's mental capacities.
Yes, you should feel worse for questioning Joe Biden than the state of the American people.
Isn't it strange that we're talking about Joe Biden in the past tense like he's not even alive anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. It's amazing, like, what has happened to that guy? Where did he go? And obviously, they don't want him out there. They don't think that he's like some important elder statesman that's going to lead you back to the Democrats. The last thing they want you to even do is really concentrate on the guy. They've completely dispensed with him to the point that Jake Tapper feels comfortable writing books about how stupid his presidency was. They're just like, there's not even an effort to rehabilitate his image. It's just like, oh, good, he's out of the picture. Thank God.
Elon should send him an email on a pulse test.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to respond. I don't think he knows how email works. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the call as always, sir. Let me see here. I've got let's see, Xavier calling in from Tyson's Corner, line 1. Xavier, you're on the Vince Coglianese show.
Hey, Vince. Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Great, Xavier.
Oh, great. Yeah, I noticed on that tape where Jake Tapper is scolding that gal for supposedly making fun of Joe Biden's stuttering, and he says to her, "You're trying to diagnose him from afar." Okay, let me wind the tape back, but wasn't CNN one of those networks back in 2017 that was bringing in psychologists and trying to supposedly diagnose President Trump's psychological state from afar?
Yes, in fact, Brian Stelter hosted a show called Reliable Sources, which was designed to that was designed to give you a spit take just reading the name of the show. And on his program, he had someone called Dr. Bandy Lee, that can't be her real name, co-author of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and Dr. Alan Francis, author of Twilight of American Sanity. A psychiatrist analyzes the age of Trump. And this person, Bandy Lee, MD, on her then, it was called Twitter profile, she wrote, Donald Trump is not an Adolf Hitler. At least Hitler improved the daily life of his followers, blah, blah, blah. She talks about his pathologies. Yeah, so yes, they were diagnosing Trump from afar on CNN.
Yeah. And by the way, on a slightly different note, I don't know if you caught the news segment. They had a part there where some of these nonprofits, they mentioned Lutheran Social Services was going to depend on more money. As I recall, Lutheran Social Services was one of those NGOs that was supposedly wrapped up in trafficking some of these illegals into the country.
Yeah, there was, I think that was the one. Yeah, there were three that always stuck out to me. There was Catholic Charities, there was Jewish Family Services, and then a Lutheran group too. And yeah, the government had spent a lot of money, printed and sent out a lot of money to these religious organizations to traffic human beings into the country, which always struck me as yet another incoherence on the left, Xavier, because isn't it the left who constantly crows about separation of church and state? But the second they can cut checks and send them to religious organizations to advance human trafficking, they don't want you to pay attention to it. They would do it under the cover of darkness. They would hide it from cameras, and they would send tons and tons and tons of money and subvert these religious institutions to serve cruel purposes.
Yep, and yet here's the AP news feed giving us this little bit of news that Lutheran Social Services is going to need to look for money elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Isn't that ironic?
Well, yeah, that's what happens when the criminal scheme dries up. Thank you, Xavier. Appreciate the call. Yeah, that's right. Glenn is calling in from Burke, Virginia. Glenn, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese show. Hello. On line 3. Glenn is on line 3. Hello, Glenn.
Isn't the fact that Tapper wrote this book admittance that he's either the biggest liar or the stupidest person on the earth? I mean, seriously, all the conservatives and Republicans like you and all the people that talked about it knew it was intuitively obvious to the most casual observer this guy was not well.
Well, like I said, Julian Castro brings it up during a primary debate back in 2020. Let me see real quick. I'm going to look right now. Who was hosting that debate? 2020 presidential candidate Julian Castro. I hope it's CNN. I really hope it's CNN. Thursday's primary debate. Let's see. Well, 2020. This is back in the day. Let's see. This is September of 2019. And Dateline CNN, 2020 presidential candidate Julian Castro said his criticism of Joe Biden and his health care policy during Thursday's Democratic debate wasn't personal and denied that he was attacking the former vice president's memory. What a lie. Quote, I wouldn't do it differently, he said. That was not a personal attack. he said Friday on CNN's New Day. This was about a disagreement over what the vice president said regarding health care policy. Castro, who served in the Obama administration, accused Biden, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the point is, even on CNN, they were talking about this, that Julian Castro was straight up calling out Joe Biden's lack of mental faculties. So this was well known for a very long time, and it basically went undiscussed during the Biden presidency. Glenn.
Yeah, and they knew they looked like they didn't even care they looked like fools trying to defend him when everybody knew this guy was not well, and he was president of the United States. How about her saying that? Yeah, he's guilty, but we're not going to do anything because he can't stand trial, but yet he can be president. Oh, amazing.
Yes. No, totally amazing. And grotesque, obviously. Glenn, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, that was the rationale. We're not gonna charge him. His brain doesn't work at all. Let's see. Jack is calling in from Arlington, Virginia, line 6. Hello, Jack. You're on the Vince Coglianese show.
Hey, Vince. Good day to you.
Hey, good day to you.
Hey, so I just wanted to point out, I don't think that this gets enough recognition. I think they did a statistic on Joe Biden. He took about 577 vacation days during his presidency.
Yes, that's what the New York Post. That's what the New York Post. They documented this. They said it was 577 days. And what did you conclude about that?
Oh, I just think, I thought that might have, voters could have used that maybe a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Well, that was my favorite part of his presidency, to be honest with you, Jack. I was like, please stay on vacation, would you? I'm perfectly fine with you wrestling with beach chairs. I'd rather you do that than whatever it is you think you're doing inside of the White House. 577 vacation days over a 4-year term. That was the most vacation days that any president has had in at least the last half century, which comes as a surprise to no one. But that's a great piece of data, Jack. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Vince.
Really appreciate that, Jack, pointing out that Biden was on vacation the entire time. I think President Trump may have golfed once in this last month. I'm not sure. It does seem like it's relentless, though. It's like the guy's always working. Those Marines, that normally stand outside the Oval Office, right outside the Oval Office, you've got the Marines that are dressed well, standing outside the Oval Office. They hold the door for people who come in and out of the exterior of the White House into the Oval Office area, the West Wing, and they didn't get a lot of reps during the Biden presidency. Did you notice? Because Biden was almost never in the West Wing. That's always the fun fact. If you see the Marine, that means the president's in the West Wing. Biden wasn't. Biden was like, he wasn't there. In his head or in the West Wing, for that matter. President Trump is there all the time. That really has to change the pace for the Marines over there. Those guys, they're standing all day long now outside the West Wing because the president's constantly working. In fact, today we already had the cabinet meeting where I'm going to get into this a little bit more. President Trump presenting this golden ticket plan, the gold pass to get the debt paid down and make it so that if you're a super rich foreigner and you'd like to become an American citizen, you can begin the pathway to citizenship by helping the United States pay off the national debt in a big way. It's kind of a cool plan. I'm interested to see all the details, but it is neat. The president clearly thinking this through. What can we do here? What do we have that people might want to buy? Well, they'd love to become Americans. What if we charge them millions of dollars to make that happen? So President Trump presenting that plan today. But he had the cabinet meeting. He's not done. My guess is he's going to take more questions, too. He's going to sign more executive orders today. Will Scharf is going to be handing him more executive orders. You're going to hear his marker scratching on him. And he's going to be answering questions from the pool, I assume, the White House press pool, which is now composed of an expanded media, thanks to the White House changing the way the White House press pool operates yesterday, to the consternation of the legacy media. They're all angry about it. I think it's great that they're expanding access. It's cool. The legacy media is really angry that their cartel is being disrupted. You're not allowed to let normal people in here to ask normal questions. We thought we had this locked up. Not anymore. Not anymore. We got a lot more ahead. It's 421 now.
Mark Levin, weekdays 6 till 9 on 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
All right, coming up, we got Mike McCormick joining us here in a few minutes, former Joe Biden stenographer who's written a new book on how the Obama deep state defiled the Catholic Church and executed the Wuhan pandemic. Man, there's a lot going on there. And it's crazy what's happened to our country. President Trump and company trying to right the ship right now. We got a call coming in from Mark, in Norfolk, Virginia, on line 3. Mark, good afternoon, sir. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. I got a wasteful contract that I want to bring to the public's attention.
Okay.
So I've been working for the federal government for 42 years, and I know what waste looks like.
Yeah.
And this is a prime example. It's not a lot of money, but it's wasteful. I had a job to build something, and the first estimate was $30,000 to build it. I didn't like that price, so I went out and got another price for $2,700. And I was told today not to go that route, that I had to go the more expensive route.
And why was that?
Or we would be doing something illegal. You have to be kidding me.
So they forced you to spend the taxpayers' money at a higher rate because they said it would be illegal to get the cheaper deal?
Absolutely. I couldn't believe the person was telling me that. It so enraged me, I almost got up and walked out of the office.
Well, what's the illegal thing? Did they explain?
Well, they're saying that because I would be running the project and I'm a contractor, that would be illegal for the government to do. There's no such rule. None.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's you know what we've discovered over time is that the government is not interested in saving money. They're interested in spending as much as humanly possible. Isn't it amazing the world in which saving the government money is illegal to do? Thank you, Mark, as always, for your calls. Coming up, Mike McCormick. He used to write down the words that Joe Biden uttered. That was a difficult job.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
Hey, good afternoon to you. 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Congress is pushing the Trump agenda forward. To discuss that, Congressman Andy Biggs will join us coming up at 5:30. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. My next guest had to write down every word that came out of Joe Biden's mouth. He's a former stenographer for Joe Biden. He's got a brand new book, An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. Mike, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, Vince, great to be back on with you.
It's you decided that you would take a light topic to write a book about, huh?
Man, you know, I say this in the first page. This is a book I never wanted to write. I don't think anybody wants to think of their institutions as being as dark and evil as they have become. And we're seeing the way the Doge defunding of the government is just shaking our, revealing time after time how these things have been weighed against us.
I've noticed that the stuff that they're cutting isn't actually hurting anybody. It's just hurting the slush fund that the government's been creating for itself.
Yeah. And so, with that in mind, I mean, I looked into what was going on in the White House through the visitor logs that Obama had. And I had written in the past with the Hunter Biden laptop access about Joe Biden's corruption. Well, all of a sudden what I found was there was a huge connection between what Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Dennis McDonough, White House Chief of Staff, were doing with Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. At the time, he was a cardinal. He's since been defrocked because he was molesting altar boys and raping seminarians. He is a very, very bad guy. This is an evil-doing man who was at the highest levels of the Catholic Church. And so he had all these meetings in the Obama White House directly with Dennis McDonough. And out of those meetings, I think they installed Pope Francis into the Vatican and then used Pope Francis as what I call the morality launderer to further their policies with the Catholic Church's backing, even though, it was like, these aren't things that the church really wants to get behind.
Yeah.
And that's what the book is about.
Wow. I mean, so this is predicated, this is an educated theory on your part about, Francis has been an interesting pope because he has caused a lot of consternation among faithful Catholics who are wondering about the direction of the church. What is the pope doing? What is he up to? And it's because there definitely have been some divisions in the church over Pope Francis's time, who is, by the way, of course, we should acknowledge he's been fighting some sort of serious illness, although they are reporting this week that his condition's been improving, I guess, ever so slightly. But when it comes to the Obama White House, you are of the belief that they were meddlesome in the Catholic Church to an extent that people don't realize.
Oh, yeah. What happened was, so McCarrick would go into the White House and have these meetings with Dennis McDonough.
Uh-huh.
And there was a lot of significant travel. There was significant meetings that he had in 2012, in the fall of 2012. And then he took travel to Argentina. This is reported in there was a Vatican document report done on him after he was defrocked.
Uh-huh.
And it's the report on Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. So he took travel to Argentina in October, and then he went back in December of 2012. Well, this was just 6 weeks before Pope Benedict retired. And I think they were setting up something to tell what was going on. And, this report doesn't go into great detail about who McCarrick saw or what he was doing down there. It doesn't mention that he met with then Archbishop Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis.
Right.
But
he was the Archbishop. He was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Right.
And then when Benedict announces his retirement in the middle of February of 2013, McCarrick was right there. He's right there in Rome, and he's doing a lot of publicity, specifically naming Bergoglio as the guy who should replace Francis. It's like he was put in place as the influencer. He's all ready to go, and there he was.
Wow. So do you think that there's a relationship between all of this and the government's use of Catholic organizations to import people into the country?
Yeah, there's a direct relationship, and I put a big, really sort of hit that nail on the head in the book. What happened was in 2014, so Bergoglio gets in, and he declares himself sort of the pro-refugee pope, and he starts talking about how, we want to, globally, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, let the refugees come. It's important that they have a chance to, have a better life in a better country. Well, in 2014, in June of 2014, McCarrick goes into the White House and meets with Dennis McDonough. At that time, this is when there was the unaccompanied minor crisis on the southern border. And there were 60,000 kids, mostly between 10 and 17, but some as young as 4. And they showed up along the southern border in the spring and summer of that year. And that's when they built the cages for the kids. Jay Johnson built those cages.
Yeah.
And
so that's the answer to Trump's question, right? Who built the cages, Joe? Jay Johnson did.
That's exactly right. And nobody's ever really understood why did all these kids start showing up? Because they had to be escorted there by cartel coyotes. So they have this meeting in June. At the time, Joe Biden was put in charge of something called the Alliance for Prosperity, something that he sort of developed. And they brought into the White House the presidents of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Well, the president of El Salvador at the time was a guy named Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was smuggling drugs into the United States at that time by the ton. And the DEA knew it. They had his brother on tape in February of 2014 talking about how we're going to do this drug smuggling and it's going to go through the government. So the DEA knew it, and I know after 14 years working around the White House, that kind of information goes up the chain, especially when a world leader is going to walk into the White House and meet with the president and the vice president.
Yeah.
So they would have told them. They would have said, hey, this guy's got a drug. There's a drug investigation on him. And he comes in anyway. They don't say anything. They meet him. Within a week, McCarrick is back in the White House meeting with Dennis McDonough 3 times in 3 weeks in that August of 2014. And McCarrick at the time was on the board of the Catholic Relief Services and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those entities got huge amounts of money for this human trafficking, child trafficking. And this is literally McCarrick and McDonough setting the church up to be in line with cartels who are trafficking drugs and people into the United States at the time. Orlando Hernandez, one of his campaign contributors, was El Chapo from the Sinaloa cartel. They were very closely aligned then. And so out of that, in the fall, Joe Biden announces this Alliance for Prosperity, where he lauded it through the Congress, $1.5 billion to those 3 countries. So $500 million to El Salvador, $500 million to Honduras, and $500 million to Guatemala. That's our tax money going directly into the hands of cartel-affiliated government officials. And that's what happened on the southern border. And what happened was Trump came in. Trump came in 2016 and put a stop to it.
Yes.
And they panicked, and they had to, say, wait a minute, hold on, what do we do? They connived to get rid of Trump for 4 years. Finally, when they got rid of him, that's when Joe Biden opened up the border. That Alliance for Prosperity in 2014 was basically the starter kit for what became Joe Biden's tragic southern border fiasco.
Yes. As you look back at that border fiasco, Mike, as a guy who's investigated and reported on the Biden family finances and the way they were enriching themselves, did the border crisis play a role in enriching Biden and his family in any way?
Hunter had invested in an app that sent remittances back and forth. So he had an investment. One of his technology investments was into that. I haven't looked that deeply into it, but I do know that was the case.
Yeah.
He and Joe had also invested in a company called Metabiota that wasn't involved with this trafficking stuff, but they were involved in the biolabs in Ukraine, which wasn't really part of the Catholic Church stuff, but they were doing all kinds of dirty stuff back then.
It's pretty crazy. Let's talk about other labs. You write in this book about the Wuhan plandemic, is how you describe it in the title. What do you tackle here?
Well, that's the Metabiota. So Joe Biden and Hunter Biden had an investment. Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners had an investment in this company Metabiota. And that is, as Joe was going into Ukraine and setting up all this U.S. aid there through USAID, Metabiota got contracts in Ukraine and the Republic of Georgia to set up these biolabs. And the biolabs eventually became part of a package that was called Predict2. So in 2014, in November, this is as they're setting up this Alliance for Prosperity.
Yes.
Obama goes to China and he meets with Xi Jinping, and they make an agreement that we're going to have infectious disease research done in China, and
right,
vice versa.
Well, the whole concept, if I remember correctly, this idea they call the program Predict, or use as you just said, Predict2, and the concept is that they're going to work on these viruses in the lab. They're going to make really dangerous viruses just as a test, as a sample to figure out how these viruses might develop. And the goal, at least as they sold it to us, was to prevent us from becoming sick to a not yet developed virus that hadn't developed yet naturally. They were trying to, quote, predict how those natural developments would take place, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that was $200 million went to USAID, U.S. taxpayers went to USAID to fund this Predict2. And Predict2 was the second of 2 funding cycles. So there was a Predict1 in 2009 to 2014, It was refunded with a much higher amount in 2014 that ended in 2015. Trump comes in and
it was
says,
banned, right?
Banned. Trump comes in and he says, I'm not funding it anymore. We're not putting any more funding in this global virus surveillance stuff. So it ends in 2019 with no funding. And that's exactly when Wuhan came out.
Yeah, that's right. At the towards the tail end of 2019. It's just amazing. It's just you really have to be like Mike McCormick. You have to have an encyclopedic mind to be able to track all of the data points here. And Mike, you've spent a lot of time inside of these, well, not just in the White House itself, but inside the White House visitor logs and stitching all of this together. So I really appreciate that. The book is called An Almost Insurmountable Evil: How Obama's Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic. And Mike, before you go, President Trump, he still has a task ahead of him, right, to kind of root out that very deep state that you're talking about.
I think he wants to have J.D. Vance do an investigation of how the CIA infiltrated the Vatican. The Catholic Church has been infiltrated. The CIA was behind it. They've been doing stuff like that for decades. And J.D. Vance would be a good guy. I think a lot of people trust him. He's a newly converted Catholic, so he has an interest in the faith.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have any hangover from the deep state. He's so new to politics, they don't have anything on him. So I think he could actually make some headway with an investigation like that.
Yeah. Well, even if they don't have anything on him, it hasn't stopped them from inventing stuff in the past. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, no, you're right. JD is the right guy for the job. I'm glad he's there, and there's a lot to do. Hey, Mike McCormick, thank you very much. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, Vance. We'll talk soon.
Always good to talk to you. That's Mike McCormick, and he used to be driven crazy by Joe Biden. Joe Biden would speak, and Mike would have to write down every word he said. It's 4:49.
Breaking news and the inside story on 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
All right. Have you seen what Chris Rufo's been doing these days over at City Journal? He broke a story about the National Security Agency's secret sex chat rooms. And they were talking about, this is the PG version. This is the PG summary. Genital surgeries, trans fetishes, and sexual activities. This is what the secret classified conversations are at the National Security Agency. And he's got some new information today from an NSA whistleblower explaining how this all happened. How did the NSA, of all places, become like Looney Tunes? You can swap your gender. Let's have fun talking about it kind of place. NSA whistleblower says this, according to Chris Rufo today. About 10 years ago, they started doing the employee resource groups. They would have African-American, veterans, and pride. It was just a meeting here and there, almost like a potluck. Culture, food, a speech. Then it started to get more and more. Instead of just one day a month, it was 1 week a month, or the whole month. You could be hired as a mathematician or a staff officer or a system engineer, but you would spend your time going to all of these events and then having meetings all day about it. They got themselves into a position to help craft policy, and then they started pushing the idea that if you want to get promoted, you've got to participate in these events. And then everything became pride. You would go to a training, and it would be about privilege and how to be a better ally. A lady would give classes on how to talk to gender-neutral people. You had analysts that didn't want to do the reporting they were supposed to be doing because they were going to have to report on somebody's dead name. Dead name. You know what a dead name is? It is what something used to be called. The Gulf of Mexico is a dead name for the Gulf of America. They were having this crisis of conscience about reporting the adversary's actual name because they thought it was their dead name. And they didn't want to disrespect the person. It was like a cult that was hell-bent on pushing gender ideology. Do you hear this? An NSA whistleblower says that they had agents who were afraid to say the name of an adversary in their reporting for fear that they were, quote, dead-naming them. That's right, an adversary. So your job is to protect the country, gather all this intel, share it with the relevant people. And you didn't want to secretly insult them by secretly using the name that they were born with out of anybody's sight but the classified system in which you were entering it. Yes, it's a cult. It's a total cult. What I just read, I think that's what they call the slippery slope. It started with one meeting a year, and then eventually our whole system was taken down by this insanity. Uh-huh. Are you getting it now? Coming up, we're going to be joined by Congressman Andy Biggs. We have to talk about President Trump's plan to pay down the debt and so much more.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.